Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Elise, and this is 10 to Life, where we talk everything true crime. I'm sitting here on my pink couch. I'm actually sitting crisscross applesauce right now, just getting comfy, ready to share with you guys another horrifying true crime case. Before we jump into it, please just take a quick second, do all the YouTube things, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and welcome to the channel. We are going to jump right into the case, but I first want to kind of just paint the scene of what we're going to be talking about today. If you're a parent, or even if you're thinking about becoming a parent, most people know that every parent's worst nightmare is losing a child. Through their profound grief, the last thing that a parent wants is to be held responsible for their child's death. To onlookers, this can only look like law enforcement doing their job and catching the bad guy. But for the parent, they feel like they're trapped when the group meant to fight for truth and justice is seemingly turning against them, looking at them as though they are the suspect. And today's case explores this tumultuous experience, and it is full of twists and turns. Alright guys, so we are going to get right into it. Again, my name is Elise, this is 10 to Life, and let's dive right in. All right, you guys know that it is really important to me to only work with sponsors of products that I actually genuinely love and personally use. I don't want to endorse something that I don't love that I wouldn't use myself. So today I'm going to share with you something that I use on a daily basis. And this one has quite literally changed my entire life, and I use it every single day. Now, if you sleep like a baby every single night, this is definitely not for you. But if you're like me and you have a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep, get ready to have your life changed. Not only do I use it every day, but let me give you a little sneak peek behind the scenes of what I do when I'm going out of town with this. So I'm getting ready to leave for New York, packing all the essentials, and you know, the number one thing that I cannot live without that I had to put in my suitcase is my Beam Dream Sleep Tea. It's only 15 calories, there's no added sugar, and it helps me if I want to stay asleep, fall asleep, do all of the good things for sleep. They have so many amazing flavors like cinnamon cocoa, sea salt caramel, which is like the hot chocolate dupe, chocolate peanut butter, golden milk, and chocolate raspberry. It literally tastes like a dessert. But get this, there is no added sugar and only 15 calories. All right, guys, now get this. I have been talking to you guys about Beam for a while now because, like I said, I use it every single day. I used it before they even became a sponsor of this channel. That's how we started the partnership, because I was such an active user and customer. So I'm telling you, it is good, great stuff. Now, get this. Beam is having the biggest sale of the year right now. And for a very limited time, they are offering you 50% off your first month. Yes, I said that right. 50% off. This is a very exclusive offer that they have only done once before, and it may never ever be back. So make sure to do it and stock up before it is completely sold out, wiped clean, gone. And guys, I'm telling you, the numbers don't lie. I have shown you my Aura Ring scores before, which is what I wear that monitors my everyday energy levels, activity, sleep scores. When I'm not drinking Beam Dream Tea, my sleep scores are literally in the garbage. When I do drink Beam, it is a literally night and day difference. The numbers don't lie. Plus, in a clinical study, 93% of participants reported that Dream helped them get better sleep. And I am definitely part of that 93%. So go to shopbeam.com/10tolifeyoutube or scan the QR code on the screen to shop Beam's biggest sale of the season and get up to 50% off. The discount is auto-applied, so there is no code necessary. All you got to do is go to the link, and I am also going to put it in the description, so it's like a one click away to better sleep and sweet dreams. Trust me, guys, you will thank me later. It's honestly a game changer. It really, really, truly is. 3-year-old Riley Fox was born to Kevin Fox and Melissa Rossi. Riley was born on March 31st, 2001 and lived in Wilmington, Illinois. And Wilmington is your standard small Midwest American town with very quaint homes, cornfields, and only one small high school, Wilmington High School. Kevin and Melissa had actually met while attending Wilmington High School. Kevin had lived in Wilmington his whole life, just like his father, while Melissa had moved to the area when she was in 3rd grade. When they met, Kevin was a senior in high school and was a basketball player, and Melissa was 2 years younger and a cheerleader. They first met each other at a high school volleyball game, and Melissa actually approached Kevin first because she could sense how shy he was. So she asked him to go to homecoming, and he agreed, and then one thing led to another, and they ended up in a relationship. After he graduated high school, Kevin attended Illinois State University, and he wanted to major in graphic design. But while he was pursuing his degree, Melissa found out that she was pregnant when she was only 18 years old, and Kevin was 20 years old. So you can imagine their shock when they found out that they were having a baby so young, and it actually caused them to break up for a little bit. But eventually, the two of them accepted the responsibility of having a child. They moved in together, and Kevin quit school. Shortly after that, Melissa gave birth to their son, Tyler. After Tyler was born, Melissa got a job working as a waitress, and Kevin began working as a commercial painter. Then 3 years later, after giving birth to Tyler, they got married. And then after that, they had Riley. Now, Riley was your typical little girl. She loved to dance, shop, play dress up, help her mom around the house, and she absolutely loved watching Dora the Explorer. Riley was spunky, silly, and sassy, and she knew no stranger at all, quickly making friends with everyone she met while out and about. She was often described as a little princess, but she also still loved to fish, play outside, and get dirty. Riley was a daddy's girl through and through, and the moment that she would smile, she was sure to get anything that she wanted from her dad, Kevin. Now, I know how this goes. I have a little girl. My husband literally becomes melted ice cream around her and will give her anything she wants. So he was definitely wrapped around her finger. If people saw Kevin out and about, they also probably saw Riley running up after him or even sitting on his shoulders. Kevin also had a bike that he rode around town and eventually attached a cart to the back of it so that Riley could just sit and ride along with him.
Hi.
Hi.
I love you.
I love you.
Despite being so young, Kevin and Melissa worked extremely hard to raise their kids in the best possible way, and they always put their kids first. Kevin worked extremely hard and very long days, but that never deterred him from going home, playing with the kids, and being the most present dad that he could possibly be. And the same could be said about Melissa. They both loved their family, loved each other, loved their kids. Life was calm for their little family, and both Kevin and Melissa felt really lucky to be raising their kids in such a safe small town where they had grown up as well. In late May of 2004, the family was planning to attend a wedding for Kevin's brother, Chad Fox. Kevin was the best man, and Tyler was the ring bearer, and little Riley was going to be the flower girl. Riley had insisted that she pick out her own flower girl dress, and she was very picky about her dress choice, and she was searching for a dress that had just the right amount of twirl in it. Throughout her little dress fitting, she would dance around, and she would even curtsy in each dress that she was trying on, and she was so excited when she found the right one. So when the wedding day came, the plan was for Riley to walk down the aisle and then turn and go and sit with her mom and brother. But in true Riley fashion, she skipped that part of the assignment, and she went right up to the stage stairs and straight to her dad. That night, they had so much fun and took a bunch of family photos, which would become some of their most treasured possessions. A couple of weeks later, on June 5th and 6th in 2004, Melissa was in Chicago attending a breast cancer awareness walk with her friends. Chicago is only about an hour away from Wilmington, and Melissa felt a little bit nervous as it was her first time ever spending a night away from Riley and Tyler. But Kevin was positive that things would be just fine, and he didn't want her to worry. That Saturday on June 5th, Kevin spent the day with the kids, making posters for Melissa. They planned on driving to Chicago the very next morning to cheer her on as she finished her walk. But prior to going there, Kevin was also planning to go to Chicago that night for a concert with his friend and his brother-in-law. So Tyler and Riley headed over to Melissa's mom Sandy's house for a sleepover. Kevin drank around 6 beers at the concert, which ended around 10:30 p.m., and then he and the other guys headed to a festival after. Kevin sobered up for a couple of hours before he started driving home, stopping at Sandy's on the way around 12:50 a.m., stopping to pick up Riley and pick up Tyler. He wanted to pick the kids up that night to make it easier in the morning before they started their drive to Chicago to hold up the signs and root her on. When they got home, Kevin laid the kids down in the living room. You see, before leaving for Chicago, Melissa had washed the kids' sheets, but it was late and they were all tired, so he figured that they could just sleep in the living room versus trying to make all of the beds with the clean sheets. So that night, Tyler was going to sleep on a chair with a footrest, and Riley was going to sleep on the couch. Now, this was something that they would actually let the kids do sometimes on the weekends, and I'm sure that the kids loved it, as most kids do. I remember how exciting sibling sleepovers were when growing up, and camping out in the living room. Riley was wearing a white t-shirt with a flamingo on it, and pink capris, and Kevin covered her with a yellow blanket before kissing her goodnight. After putting them to sleep, Kevin went on the porch to smoke before going back inside and locking the front door. Their back door had been broken, so he couldn't lock that, but again, their town was really safe, so they never worried about it, truly. After locking the front door, he went to his room and tried to sleep, but felt pretty restless, even though he was exhausted. So he grabbed a snack, watched some TV while the kids were asleep, and just kind of tried to relax. Around 2:30 a.m., he turned on a fan, and then he quickly fell asleep. Maybe the white noise of it all, maybe finally exhaustion kicking in. So a few hours later, Tyler woke up, but he didn't see Riley on the couch. After looking for her with no luck, he went to wake his dad Kevin up and said, "Riley's gone." The kids often played hide and seek, so he figured that this was just one of their games, and he wasn't very worried initially. He searched through the entire house for Riley, all while calling her name. He looked in the backyard, he looked in her room, he even went next door where Riley's best friend was, but he couldn't find her there. After 40 minutes of searching, he was now very worried that something was up, and maybe there was a chance she wasn't just playing a simple game of hide and seek. But he didn't want to make a huge scene so quickly, so he called the non-emergency line at first. Now, I'm sure you might be wondering why he didn't call right away, because I wondered that too. But he claimed that he was focused on searching for Riley around his house, so in his mind, 911 was for house fires or when someone was seriously injured. He didn't think to call 911 right away because he initially didn't think that Riley was actually missing. And while on the phone, the police even reassured him not to panic and told him that kids often wander off. But the truth was, Riley had never done anything like this before. They even told Kevin not to call Melissa as it would only make her panic. Shortly after Kevin called the police, he began walking around the neighborhood calling out Riley's name. While he was walking, Kevin's cell phone began to ring, and it was Melissa. She called to figure out where they were going to meet her at the finish line after her race. But as soon as Kevin answered the phone, Melissa knew just by the sound of his voice that something was wrong. Kevin told her, "Riley's gone." So she immediately jumped in her car and she sped to Wilmington. Meanwhile, news had gotten out that Riley was missing, and it didn't take long for the community to begin rallying together to try to find her. Over 500 people were out and looking for any sign of Riley. Basically, the entire community of Wilmington was scouring the town and the surrounding forest for her. Melissa arrived in the middle of this chaos, and she found Kevin. A police officer made note that when Melissa approached Kevin, she said, "Did you do something stupid?" Now, according to Melissa, she only said that because she thought that Kevin basically created a false alarm at that point. But sadly, around 3 p.m., the search for little 3-year-old Riley came to a devastating ending. A mother and daughter were in an area called the Forsyth Woods, about 4 miles from the home. They decided to go to the area because one of them had a really bad feeling about the place. The Kankakee River runs through that area, and as the two of them were in the area, they thought that they saw a plastic bag in a creek. But they quickly realized it wasn't a plastic bag, and one of them started screaming. Instead, what they saw was a small body floating face down in the creek. They immediately called the cops, and the crime scene investigators noted several different things when they arrived. First, they found 2 white sneakers in the creek that matched the footprints found on the ground near the water's edge. They were not found together, but were close by. EBY was written on the tongue of the shoe. The shoes were taken into evidence, and they also saw that Riley was wearing that same flamingo top that she had been wearing the night before, but her underwear and her pants were missing. There was also sticky residue on her arms, which immediately made investigators think that she had been bound with tape. Another piece of tape was over her mouth, and there was a bruise on her head. After her body was found, the police asked Melissa and Kevin to come to the police station. When the two of them arrived, they were immediately separated. Melissa was put in one room, and Kevin was put in a different one. They sat and waited, and waited, and waited, and waited, and time continued to pass, and neither of them had heard any news about Riley. Finally, after 45 minutes, the two were brought into a waiting room along with various family members who had arrived. The police continued to silently just stare at the family. Melissa broke the silence, asking where was Riley, and it was actually Kevin's father who broke the news to them. The police had informed Kevin's father about what had happened earlier and asked that he tell Melissa and Kevin what happened. Upon hearing of Riley's death, Melissa and Kevin broke down while also being furious that they had not been informed earlier. Wilmington is a small town, and the police clearly weren't used to dealing with cases like that, and they may not have known how to tell Kevin and Melissa. But they knew that Riley had been found dead, and instead of informing the parents right away, they kept them waiting, and then they had the grandparent deliver the worst news anyone could possibly ever be told. Riley's body was immediately transported to be examined after she had been found. The medical examiner determined that Riley was still alive by the time she entered the creek. She was sexually violated, and she had 9 injuries to her head. The main focus was then figuring out who would have done something like that to Riley, and why. But in the meantime, Riley's family held a memorial service 5 days after she was found. The town of Wilmington only has a population of 1,000 people, but over 6,000 people attended Riley's funeral, wearing pink bows and butterflies in honor of her. Riley was buried in the flower girl dress that she had worn just 2 weeks earlier to her uncle's wedding. It was the same princess dress that she had picked out all by herself and that she was so proud of. While the funeral was packed with family, friends, and strangers, there were also 2 men holding video cameras, and they seemed to be recording the entire thing. However, they weren't filming the events of the funeral, but instead, they were filming certain people in attendance and observing their behavior. They were Will County detectives, and they claimed that they were at the funeral to try and spot anyone or anything out of the ordinary. After the funeral, the police went to Melissa's friend Colleen's house, and they asked her if she thought that Kevin could be responsible for Riley's death. Her immediate response was absolutely not. Even though the police had been observing the Fox family at Riley's funeral, they were friendly with the family as they continued to investigate Riley's murder. The lead investigator was Scott Swearingen, and Melissa and Kevin stayed in nearly constant contact with Scott, who informed them that investigators were working extremely hard to find out what happened to Riley. Investigators knew that Riley had been taken advantage of sexually and had also died from drowning. However, the DNA test from her body came back as inconclusive, which really was not helping them solve her case. The DNA needed to be tested, with more sophisticated technology at that, so it was then sent to the FBI. But it's no surprise that the waiting period for testing at the FBI was very long. They had to continue looking elsewhere while they waited for those test results. So investigators interviewed neighbors, and they were told of a red Chevy Beretta that had been spotted in the area on the night of Riley's disappearance. And they were also made aware of a house across the street that had been burglarized by someone cutting through her screen door. But the police said that there was no connection between these things and Riley's disappearance. Both Kevin and Melissa knew that because Kevin was the last adult to see Riley alive, he would likely be looked at as a suspect. Because of this, they had been more than cooperative with the police. Kevin provided DNA samples and even had his brother and father submit DNA samples as well. They answered every question that they could. They allowed the police to search them, their person, their home, and they never even hired an attorney because they truly didn't have anything to hide. They just wanted to help in any way they could if it meant that they could find whoever murdered Riley faster. In late June, 16 days after Riley's death, Melissa and Kevin finally agreed to let their son Tyler be questioned. After all, he was the only person in the room with Riley the night that she was taken. Tyler was interviewed at the Child Advocacy Center, and investigators watched the interview through a one-way mirror. Now, if you're not familiar with those, basically one side of the glass just reflects like a mirror, while the other side can be seen through like a window. The interviewer, who was considered a child interviewer specialist, was cold and started the interview by asking Tyler some basic questions. Tyler was hesitant to answer at first, as most kids would be if they were being forensically interviewed. He was already a pretty shy kid, and the interviewer really wasn't doing much to make him feel more comfortable. So the questions went from "what sports do you like?" to suddenly shifting to questions about Kevin. The interviewer tirelessly asks Tyler questions like, did he leave the house? And what did he do when he left? She even said things like, did you see him leave the house with Riley? It's okay if you did. Almost like she was feeding Tyler information. Tyler answered no, but the interviewer continued asking Tyler where his father was that night.
Did you take Riley outside? No. Did you see Dad carry her out just for a little bit? It's okay if you did. Did you see Dad take her out for just a little bit? Was he carrying her? No.
This caused Tyler to completely break down, and through tears, he asked for his mom and his dad.
Alright, I don't think there's any more questions.
The interviewer clearly seemed to not give a crap about his feelings, in my opinion, and I don't care what anyone needs to find out. In my opinion, if a child is clearly on edge and crying for their parents while repeatedly telling you no and I don't know, you stop whatever you're doing and you comfort them. You don't further traumatize them by repeatedly drilling them with questions. For an hour, this went on, and not a single person observing the interview intervened on his behalf. Instead, they continued to watch as little Tyler was extremely emotionally distraught and breaking. Tyler ended up answering no around 178 times to her questions by the time that the interview was over. Tyler was then brought back home by Detective Michael Guilfoyle, but the questioning wasn't just over yet once he left that interview room. On the way home, the detective conducted his own interview of Tyler during the car ride, without any sort of recording device, child specialist, or even an extra law enforcement official. As the summer continued to fly by, there weren't really any new answers or information coming out. Melissa and Kevin both expressed that they thought that Riley had been abducted from their house, and they asked investigators to look into their theory. Kevin also had caught wind of a rumor that a motorcycle gang had actually kidnapped and killed Riley. He asked the police to look into that theory as well, but it didn't seem like the police ever followed up on this idea. Throughout the summer, the police would drop into their home often to play with Tyler and just spend time in a way that his parents felt was just the police being kind to their family, not necessarily any true leads. By the time the fall came around, rumors had started to circulate around the small town. People had donated money to the family for the Riley Fund, but people started to think that the money was being used for other things. Melissa had been spotted with a new haircut, and the family also went on luxurious vacations to places like Las Vegas and the Ozarks. Not only that, but Melissa was driving around a brand new car, which only made people question everything even more. However, suspicion continued to rise as no reward was ever offered for information regarding Riley's murder. But little did the community know that Riley's family had in fact suggested a reward, only for the police to shut the idea down. But regardless, the big purchases began to make the community and the police suspicious. On October 26, 2004, 5 months after Riley's murder, investigators decided it was time to bring Kevin and Melissa in for some more questioning. The investigators called them and asked them to come to the station. It was late in the evening, and Kevin had already had a long day after getting up at 4:30 a.m. to go to work. He was tired and barely had eaten anything at all that day. Just like the first time that they went into the station, when they arrived, the two of them were put into separate rooms. Kevin was placed in a tiny interrogation room, and Melissa was put into a conference room. Melissa realized that when police left the room, they locked the door and therefore locked her in. The room that Kevin was placed in was meant to be recorded, but on that night, the cameras were actually turned off. Several detectives sat in the room with Kevin. Their names are Edward Hayes, Michael Guilfoyle, Scott Swearingen, Brad Watchell, and John Rudiger. They started by asking him questions that were easy. They asked him what happened that night, and Kevin told them the exact same story that he has always told. But the detectives suddenly told Kevin that they knew he killed Riley. They asked Kevin if he knew that his car had been picked up on surveillance footage the night of Riley's murder. The grainy surveillance footage showed a vehicle driving past a mobile gas station around 4 a.m. the morning that Riley disappeared. They claimed this car was the dark blue Ford Escape that the Fox family owned, but the footage was so blurry that it was genuinely difficult to confirm whether that was his car or not. It honestly just looks like any average SUV from what I could see on my end, but according to the police, they knew that it was his car. Investigators continue to yell at Kevin that they know that he was involved. The friendliness the family previously had with the detectives was all gone at this point, and the detectives were screaming at him, getting in his face, showing him pictures of Riley's body, and telling him that they knew he killed his daughter and that they knew that he had harmed her. Their scenario was that Kevin accidentally bumped Riley in the head, which ended up killing her. So to cover up his crime, he put duct tape around her and then committed the heinous sexual violation to make it seem like she was kidnapped, harmed, and murdered. Investigators started threatening Kevin, telling him that they knew people in jail who would make his life miserable and in turn would also sexually violate him when he was in prison. They said he would get 30 years to life, but that if he admitted to the crime right now, he would only get charged with manslaughter. The police wanted Kevin to do a lie detector test and told him that if he failed, he would be arrested. If he passed, he would be let go. So Kevin sat and asked the police for his father, but the police said he was too grown up for his father. Kevin asked for a lawyer, but they ignored that request too. They then brought in Detective Richard Williams to conduct that polygraph test after hours of interrogation and a full day at work. Detective Williams was fairly new to this field and had only conducted about 90 tests, which in the grand scheme of things is really not that many. He was not the police's first choice, but he was the only person available at the time, so he conducted the polygraph test with Kevin. This was around midnight, and it lasted for about 1 hour. At the end of the examination, Kevin was told that he failed. Meanwhile, Melissa had become extremely frustrated, sitting alone in the conference room with no one giving her answers. She began kicking at the door before someone came in and started telling her the news. They said that Kevin had sexually violated and killed their young daughter. Now, this was the first time that Melissa was ever told that Riley had been taken advantage of sexually. They told her about their theory in which Kevin bumped Riley's head and about the blue car on the gas station security camera footage as well. So Melissa was being made to question her husband based on what the police were saying. But deep down, she felt like Kevin would never do anything like this. She felt like if he accidentally bumped Riley's head, he would have done CPR or called 911 immediately. Deep down, she felt like her husband was not responsible for the death of their daughter. Melissa was then notified that Kevin failed the lie detector test, and then she was able to go into the room with him. Kevin and Melissa exchanged a few reassuring words. Melissa told Kevin that she knew he didn't do it, but that seemed to upset Detective Ed Hayes. He became so angry that he started screaming into Melissa's face that her husband killed their daughter. Now, obviously, this completely shocked Melissa, and she started sobbing. The two were then separated again, and investigators continued questioning Kevin. But to be fully honest, it really didn't seem like there was much questioning at all going on. Police continued to scream at him, telling him that he killed his daughter, that his family didn't love him, and continued to tell him that he would get assaulted in prison just like his daughter was. One officer even went so far as to spread his legs and push himself, his member, against Kevin's knee to make the threat even more realistic, which is just beyond disgusting and unacceptable in my opinion. They continued to tell him that if he admitted to the accident scenario, they could strike a deal with him. However, they hadn't videotaped any of this, and they needed Kevin's confession on videotape. So after about 24 hours of being awake, while being starved and interviewed for 14 hours straight, the investigators then turned on the video camera and taped Kevin's confession. In the tape, Kevin claimed he got home around 1:30 a.m., put the kids down, watched TV, ate a snack, and then went to the bathroom about an hour later. When he was opening the bathroom door, he hit Riley, who was standing on the other side. She fell to the ground and appeared lifeless. Kevin panicked, grabbed duct tape, put her in the car, and thought about going to the hospital, but then decided that it would be a better idea to make it look like she had been kidnapped. So he put duct tape around her mouth and her limbs, used his finger to make it look like sexual violation, put her in the river, went home, cried, and fell asleep. This confession was 20 minutes and was the only part of the 14-hour interrogation that had ever been recorded. He was then arrested and put in jail. While in jail, Kevin called his brother Chad, who had found a lawyer, Kathleen Zellner. Kathleen was a well-known lawyer who specialized in wrongful conviction cases. She was positive that Kevin had a case and began working on his behalf immediately. Kevin immediately abandoned his confession and told Kathleen about the interrogation. A press release happened the very next day to explain everything about the arrest. Kevin, Melissa, and their family all agreed that they would not post bail for Kevin. Instead, they planned to use that money to build up a very strong defense. The legal team's main focus was to get the DNA found on Riley tested again. If they could find with 100% certainty that the DNA was not Kevin's, he could be released. Kathleen was trying to find where the sample of DNA was located exactly and had been told that it was sent to the state crime lab for further testing. However, shortly after Kevin was put in jail, Detectives Hayes called that lab and told them not to test the DNA anymore. Not only that, but Riley's family then learned about Tyler's second interview in that car and the outcome of that. The detective had written a report about the interview and claimed that Tyler said that his dad took Riley somewhere during the night, and then he saw his dad washing his clothing when he got back. Kevin and Melissa were not informed about this interview until months after it happened. But remember, there was also absolutely zero video evidence of that interview ever taking place. So really, it would come down to that DNA sample, and the Fox family was desperate. Eventually, Kevin's legal team was able to obtain the DNA and send it to a private laboratory for testing. The lab was barely able to get a sample size big enough to test, but the results of the saliva found inside of Riley showed with 100% certainty that the DNA was not Kevin's. Kevin had spent 243 days behind bars, but on June 17, 2005, the prosecutor dropped the charges and he was released after 8 months in jail.
Less than a year later, Fox was exonerated through DNA evidence with help from attorney Kathleen Zellner.
Happy, I'm excited.
We knew he didn't do anything wrong, and we knew that that would eventually come out.
Unfortunately, the police had absolutely effed the entire investigation up. They used Kevin when he was at his most vulnerable, tired, hungry, and emotionally drained. They manipulated him and made it seem like the only way out of this situation was if he confessed. Not only that, but they used illegal tactics, such as offering him a plea deal to confess to a crime, saying he would only get manslaughter if he admitted to it. However, even though Riley's family was relieved that Kevin's innocence was proven, there was still way more work to be done. Who killed Riley? What was the motive behind it? Was it someone who knew her? The FBI was now more involved in this case than they had been before. The police had spent so much time trying to convince everyone that Kevin was the killer that they just brushed over some very obvious clues. For example, the robbery that happened on that street that same night, the red car seen in the neighborhood, and those shoes that were found by where Riley was found. By this point, the Fox family was finally able to offer a reward of $100,000 for any information leading to Riley's killer. This caused a woman named Tricia Kiefer to come forward and speak with the FBI. Tricia said that her boyfriend was acting very weird after the discovery of Riley's murder. She would try to make conversation about it, saying how sad it was, but her boyfriend would respond in ways that were unnatural and almost scripted, which made her feel really uncomfortable and a bit weary. Tricia told authorities that her boyfriend was 38-year-old Scott Eby. Scott had an extensive record and at that point was serving time at the Lawrence Correctional Center. After a very rough childhood, Scott had spent most of his adult life in prison. He first went to prison at 17 years old in 1988 for forgery, then again in 1992 for burglary, and again in the year 2000 for burglary. He had been released on parole and was out at the time of Riley's disappearance. But then he had sexually violated a relative, so he was back in prison serving 2 7-year sentences. Scott was also known to be violent, and at the time of Riley's disappearance, Tricia, his girlfriend, said he was living with his mother who lived 1 mile away from Riley's house. Records show that Scott had even been visited by the police on the day of Riley's disappearance because he had apparently tried to take his own life. When the police visited him, he even asked them about little Riley. But apparently, the police didn't think to ask any further questions. They're denying the reward fund to be set up by the family. They have all these leads they're not investigating. They have a guy who lives a mile from Riley's house, who tries to take his own life the very day that Riley's body is found. While police are there because of that, he's asking them about this little girl while clearly in distress. And they're not putting the clues together? Guys, for once, the math is math in here. And the police didn't do anything about it. Instead, they continued to question and berate Tyler, a child, with no footage, no recorder, no parents present, then completely attack the father, blame him, coerce him into confessing. It's unbelievable. When the FBI went to question Scott, now in jail because the police had completely fumbled the ball, he initially denied having anything to do with Riley's murder. They asked for a DNA sample, and then they left. However, after they were gone, Scott called his mom in a panic, and he gave her some very alarming information, along with a confession. Later that night, he also wrote a note with a full confession, and then he once again tried to take his own life by hanging himself in his cell. He survived, and later confessed on video to the FBI agents. He claimed that on the night of the incident, he was under the influence of many drugs, including cocaine and alcohol. He was driving his mom's red Chevy Beretta before parking and entering the home across the street from Kevin and Melissa. He said that he robbed that house and then walked to the Fox home where he realized that the back door was open. His initial intent was to steal something, but his plans changed when he saw Riley. Scott described that he was fixated on her, and he could not let her go. He then left the house, backed his car up to their home, went back inside, took Riley, and then drove to the woods. When he was in the woods, he violated her sexually in a nearby park bathroom. And he said he threw her underwear in the bathroom trash can. Yet again, the police had missed the mark on another thing. That bathroom was nearby where Riley had been found, yet they never even went there, never even searched it, never looked for clues, evidence, anything. Scott said that he was wearing a bandana around his face, but that it fell down in the middle of the assault, and that because of that, Riley saw his face. Because she saw his face, he said that he had no choice but to kill her. So he brought her down to the river and he drowned her. He then said the absolutely most heartbreaking and horrific thing I think I have ever heard, saying that throughout the attack, Riley had been crying out for her dad. Now, I can't even imagine the fear that little Riley had as she was ruthlessly being murdered and sexually attacked by this disgusting excuse for a human. She's calling out for her dad, her savior, her hero, the same person that the police tried to pin this horrific crime on. Later on, they finally were able to connect Scott's DNA to the crime. With the DNA, the shoes, and the confession, it was 100% that they had the right guy, which let me just say, I really don't get why those shoes were not looked into further. It literally had Scott's last name written on them, and they were shoes that were from the Department of Corrections from his previous prison stint. I mean, it really should not have taken a genius in the law enforcement field to start connecting the dots here and notice that these were actually shoes from prison. Oh, it could be an offender who's reoffending. Obviously. But apparently, nobody thought to do that. Nobody thought to do that math. Or they just ignored it as they went haywire on Kevin. After they had his DNA, they were able to fully charge him and a press statement was made.
Half an hour ago, I appeared before the Honorable Gerald Kinney, the Chief Judge of Will County, and obtained a warrant for the arrest of Scott Eby on 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of predatory sexual assault. I've never dealt with a case, this heart-wrenching that took so long to get a resolution, but this resolution, I think, has everyone just so gratified that we're able to finally put this to rest. At this point, it's clear that there's no evidence of any kind that will connect Kevin Fox to this murder of his 3-year-old daughter.
Then Kathleen, Kevin's attorney, spoke out.
This is a father who was grieving over the loss of his daughter, and the way these investigators handled him was so unbelievably cruel that the only way he could see out was to give a confession, hoping he could get out the door on an involuntary manslaughter charge, hire an attorney, and then undo everything.
Kathleen Zellner is the defense attorney who took on Kevin's case, fighting for him even when he had no more strength to fight for himself. But today, she says the fight is finally over.
The prosecutor made it very clear today that this arrest shows that Kevin Fox is completely innocent. He had no connection with this person. I don't know what else could happen that could clear him. You've got someone else's DNA on the murder victim. I think it's over. I don't think there's any question that he's not involved.
On November 10th, 2010, Scott took a plea deal, pleading guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of predatory criminal sexual assault of a child. He received life in prison with no possibility of parole and forfeited his rights to appeal his sentence. But what about Kevin? What about Kevin and Melissa? They had been treated horrendously by the police and had even received extreme backlash from the community because of it. They had been torn to shreds because of the money they were spending. But really, Melissa had purchased a new car because the old one reminded her too much of Riley. And those vacations that they went on weren't really vacations at all. They had been various family functions that had been planned months in advance, prior to Riley's murder. They were just trying to keep some sense of normalcy for Tyler while everything else was blowing up around them. Even though Kevin was released, his reputation was essentially tarnished. Family and friends built their support for Kevin and wore t-shirts that said, "Test before arrest," and also 376 days of a killer on the loose. At the time of the investigation, State Attorney Jeff Tomchek was up for re-election against his rival, James Glasgow. Many speculated that Jeff pushed for finding Kevin guilty in order to close the case and increase his likelihood of re-election. However, he eventually lost the election and was often blamed for mishandling the case. In November of 2004, Kathleen filed a lawsuit on behalf of Kevin and Melissa and claimed that there were violations of false arrest, due process, malicious prosecution, conspiracy, and intention infliction of emotional distress. Will County lawyers tried to settle with the couple, but they refused. Melissa expressed that they took away the one person she needed the most during that time, and that they caused extreme amounts of damage to their family. They went to trial, and on December 20th of 2007, the court ruled in favor of Kevin and Melissa. The jury determined that Kevin was not in the wrong and that the 5 investigators involved violated Kevin's due process and intentionally inflicted emotional distress. They failed to look at obvious evidence, obvious clues. They threatened Kevin and failed to process the crime scene DNA. The couple initially filed for $15.5 million in damages, but the jury awarded them $8.5 million. Kevin and Melissa's lives changed forever. Although Kevin was wrongfully convicted, the Wilmington community still viewed him as a murderer, and people would often send him threats. People didn't trust the family anymore, and it was getting so bad that Tyler was also being affected. He wouldn't be invited to things like sleepovers or birthday parties, so the family needed to get away from the Wilmington area to start a new life, so they moved to a different suburb outside of Chicago, and then they had another daughter named Tegan. However, Melissa and Kevin eventually split because the traumatic experience of Riley's death and Kevin's arrest had put a lot of strain on their relationship and on the family. They stayed on amicable terms, and each of them remarried and started other families. Kevin moved to Arkansas and opened a business called Fox Painting. But sadly, on March 20th, 2023, Kevin was killed in a car crash where a driver collided head-on with him, and both he and the other driver passed away. One can only hope that Kevin and Riley are reunited and back together. Riley's case is an example of the fact that the wrong people in power can cause devastating and long-term effects for everyone involved, and can also leave dangerous people out on the loose. Sadly, 4 of those 5 investigators are still working in law enforcement today, despite what they did with Riley's case. I don't even think that we could call it mess-ups, because in my opinion, it was pure lack of care, consideration, and was just a dumpster fire. If they had done their jobs right in the first place, they very well could have and likely would have avoided adding to the pain and suffering that Riley's family was going through. My heart truly breaks for her family, and I hope that by sharing this case, not only is Riley's name remembered, but more people can learn how to protect themselves if they are ever being cornered legally, and if their rights are ever violated in any sort of way. It is absolutely unacceptable and appalling. What do you think? And how the hell are 4 of those investigators still employed? That's what I want to know. That's really scary to think about. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, guys. It is absolutely a travesty, in my opinion, that they're still employed. I just don't get it. And it's just so sad for Melissa, for Kevin, for their whole family. The whole thing was handled and mishandled from the very start. Where was the justice for poor little Riley in all of that? Instead, her dad gets targeted and singled out, and the real killer and gross predator is looked over, even though there's a million clues showing that he is the guy. It's unbelievable. I'm not a detective. I'm not trained well to be a detective, but let me tell you something. I'm confident that I could have handled that case better. Just saying. And that's not to shade all the police out there, because there are very good officers and I'm not nearly qualified enough to be an investigator. But like in that case, the math was mathing all over the place. Doesn't take a rocket scientist. Truly, it doesn't. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in. I know I got a little heated in this one, but it is one that just kind of really infuriates me and gets under my skin. So I'm getting a little passionate. All right, guys, thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will see you on the next case. Take care. Bye.